Andrew es autor de varios libros y su último libro, que se llama Net Positive, que de alguna manera plantea esta idea de dar más de lo que tomamos, ¿sí? Este neto positivo, dar más de lo que tomamos, es un libro que coescribió con Paul Polman, que es el ex CEO de Unilever y gran impulsor de esta agenda en el mundo de los negocios. Andrew Winston es parte de la comunidad Sustainable Brands desde sus inicios, desde el comienzo, y es autor de mucha bibliografía y construyó mucho conocimiento en relación a cómo aplicar el paradigma de la sustentabilidad y ahora con esta visión regenerativa al mundo de los negocios. Así que bueno, los dejo con Andrew Winston en forma virtual y seguimos. Gracias.
Hola, soy Andrew Winston. Muchas gracias por invitarme a este importante evento. Me gustaría estar allí con ustedes en Montevideo, pero no puedo esta vez. Quizá el próximo año. También me gustaría hablar completamente en español, pero no puedo tampoco. So that's about it for my Spanish. I'm still learning. Thank you so much for having me. I want to jump right in. We have limited time. So, a few years ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had a really interesting moment in the world. It was a few weeks in, everything had shut down, and cities around the world had the cleanest air they had ever seen. Los Angeles, Milan, New Delhi, radical changes. Now, this is not the way to get there, through a global shutdown of the economy, but it gave us a vision of what a sustainable world and sustainable cities could look like with clean air. So imagine if the economy is running on renewable energy. EVs are everywhere, and people have a chance at a good life, a living wage. This is what it can be. And I think sometimes when we talk about sustainability, we forget what we're shooting for. We get lost in the details of reducing emissions or looking at human rights issues and forget why. The last few years have brought enormous change in what it means to be a business. In the US, in August, about 3 years ago, the Business Roundtable, which is a group of CEOs of the largest companies operating in North America, issued a statement about the purpose of business. They said, "We've made shareholders the core focus for decades, but that doesn't really reflect how we operate. We serve stakeholders." And it wasn't just these CEOs. There was a new website put up by the Financial Times in Europe saying that we needed to rethink capitalism. This was an acceleration of this discussion of stakeholder capitalism instead of just shareholders. And then the pandemic hit, and it tested every business. And I think many stepped up. A medical device maker, Medtronic, released the designs of one of its ventilators so that big car companies could make these ventilators. We didn't have enough. And I think what happened over the last few years is the idea of sustainability has expanded to be the role of the business in society. And it's a set of really core questions. Who are you? Who do you serve? Is it just shareholders? And speaking of shareholders, big investors have come to the table on ESG really for the first time. Larry Fink runs the largest investment fund in the world. It's about $10 trillion under management. And he has written a letter to the CEOs of the world every January. And he has said repeatedly in recent years that ESG, that climate change, are critical issues. In his most recent letter, he made the point that stakeholders, delivering for them, is creating long-term value for shareholders. That this is not some different form of capitalism, it is capitalism, but the way we create value is changing. So why is there so much pressure now? What has happened to make this such a top-of-mind issue? Well, the world is accelerating. We are seeing exponential change in, unfortunately, the big problems we face. It's a volatile world, and we face existential challenges. We have enormous inequality around the world, where 1% of the population has about half the world's wealth. This creates instability around the world. And of course, the other major existential crisis is climate change, which is threatening our very survival. But if we need to put it in monetary terms, the reinsurance company Swiss Re says the world economy could lose about 1/5 of its GDP if we head towards 3 degrees Celsius of warming. And that's kind of an average number. It's pretty bad, but it sounds survivable. But the reality is, in many locations, it won't be 18% of GDP, but 100%, as places become flooded or too hot to live and work. And so we've hit this tipping point where there's still a lot of people saying that it's too expensive to do anything about climate change or inequality. But really, the cost of doing nothing, the cost of inaction, is now far higher than the cost of action. This is a fundamental reality that we have to, I think, make clear in all organizations. Now, the exponential change in our problems is not good news, but we're also seeing exponential change in some of the solutions. This shows the amount of renewable energy that companies have bought globally. Not utilities, but companies buying for their own use. It is growing exponentially. And it's a fairly large number every year now, over 30 gigawatts. And the reason is fundamentally that there's been an exponential change in the cost of clean energy. Wind and solar have come down 70 to 90% over the last 10, 12 years, and they are cheaper than any other source of energy on average. This has also happened with battery prices, which makes storage and electric vehicles cheaper. So the trends are working both for us and against us. But the main reason I think that companies really have no choice now in pursuing a more sustainable, more regenerative world is that the pressure is just rising. The other mega trends that are, I think, deep and are unavoidable include transparency, as we get more and more data on everything, and people want to know what's in every product. It's called the clean label movement in consumer products. We want to know where this product came from. What are the ingredients? Who made it? Were they paid a living wage? What's the carbon footprint? And there's more and more help for those who want this information. As part of their sustainability efforts, Google launched a tool to help people make 1 billion greener choices. If you search for flights on Google, they may show you different airlines or routes that have a smaller footprint. So this demand for more information is only rising, and it's coming especially from younger generations. The millennials, who aren't as young anymore, they're reaching 40 now, and the Gen Z, who are coming into the workforce, surveys for years have shown that they have a different attitude about business. Millennials have already said, in majorities, that they've chosen or not chosen to work for a company based on its values. And Gen Z, the vast majority, believe that companies should be solving environmental and social problems, that it's just part of doing business. So the core question, I think, for any company is, how are you going to attract and retain talent unless you have a vision and purpose and are building towards a more regenerative future? So if the youth are one giant pressure point and investors are another, there's also just business pressing on other businesses through supply chains. Salesforce has launched what they call an exhibit, but looks a lot like a contract with its suppliers. And they say, if you don't hit certain climate targets, you will be in breach, meaning we will charge you more or we won't pay you as much. And that's kind of the stick, the punishment form of pressure. There's also, I think, maybe more effective, the carrot or the incentive. So Tesco, the retailer in Europe, and Santander have joined forces to offer Tesco suppliers, the ones who hit ESG targets and do well on things like carbon emissions, they get from the bank better financing terms, lower cost of capital. That is a really incredible incentive to keep investing in sustainability. And then some companies, it won't even be a carrot or a stick. It will just be a requirement. As more companies say to their suppliers, you must use renewable energy. Transparency, young people, investors, businesses on each other. What does this all mean with our existential challenges? Well, fundamentally, we have to go faster and much bigger. It's not enough to just be less bad. We need regenerative models of business. And business has to step up. Government can't do it alone, nor can business. And this need is why I spent the last few years working on this book, Net Positive. I wrote with Paul Pullman, the former CEO of Unilever, really the company that I think has done the most as a big public company to move the agenda. And our definition of a net positive business is one that profits from solving the world's problems, not creating them. And the core question we're asking is the world better off because your business is in it? I find that when people stop and think about that, it's profound. And the core attributes of a net positive business are really centered around taking ownership, responsibility for your impacts through your entire value chain, through the life cycle of your products, and thinking about how you contribute to the problems we share. And it's about taking a long-term view of value creation and serving all stakeholders, improving their well-being. Shareholders will do well, but only because you've solved problems for stakeholders. And then because our problems are so large, we can only solve them together. So this is also about a belief in partnering, transformative partnerships. We also need a different kind of leadership. One of the leaders in business we admire is Ajay Banga, who was the CEO and now chairman of MasterCard. He's written and talked about how in business you need not just intelligence or emotional intelligence, but decency to show that you care about the people you work with or for you or above you. And the core attributes of a net positive leader, they do start with decency and purpose, but at core it's about courage. Do you have the courage to be humble, to show empathy, to ask for help, to seek partnership, maybe with NGOs or people that are critics, and work with them? And we think it's important to realize that everyone can be a leader. This isn't just for CEOs. So while I'd love you all to get the book, I'll give you a quick overview of what some of the key elements of building a net positive business. What does it look like? Well, not surprisingly, purpose is at the core. Unilever, which is one of the major case studies in the book, but not the only one, has a history, a long history, 140 years, where they started with a mission of cleanliness and health. And under Paul, they expanded that to making sustainable living commonplace. And there's a series of companies with really great, very clear kind of visions and missions. So Bayer in Europe wants to reduce hunger and provide health. Schneider Electric wants to use their resources to make buildings and other things more efficient, use energy in the best possible way. There are great missions out there to be inspired by. Second, once you have kind of purpose in place, companies need to start setting very big and bold goals based on what the world needs, based largely on the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is about really blowing up the boundaries that companies keep in their minds or think about as their kind of areas of expertise or just their operations, and to think much bigger. And net positive goals are starting to be seen. So Microsoft, for example, has said they will sequester carbon equal to all the emissions they've had since they were founded. It's a retroactive neutrality. Google has a similar goal. but has another really interesting one, which is by 2030, they want their data centers, their operations powered entirely by green electrons, only renewable energy, which means they need a lot of on-site, they need storage, but they also need to change the systems, the grids that they're in. And they talk about this in their plans. And this is something that's really critical. The core of Net Positive is changing systems and working in partnership. That is the core story. And there's great examples that we can learn from of partnering, say, with suppliers or with peers. So the Loop program that's launched in many cities around the world has taken consumer products companies, given them a few designs for packaging, and it's delivered to people's homes. When they finish using it, they put it back in the box, send it back, and the packaging can be reused many, many times. This kind of shared operation and test is the kind of thing we need to share and solve our big problems together. We're also seeing really innovative partnerships in the traditional form. Now, I've said that this is all good business. I've implied, I think, that this isn't about philanthropy, but there's one story from Unilever that it will sound like philanthropy or corporate social responsibility, but it is much deeper. So I think the largest, most effective partnership between an NGO and a business ever has been UNICEF and Unilever on hand washing. 5 million children die every year from diseases that are easily avoided if you wash your hands. And so together, they've done hand washing events in India, in South America, really all over the world, and reached 1 billion kids and new mothers. But this is core to the brand of Lifebuoy, the soap that they've had since they were founded. It isn't an offshoot. It isn't the side. This is how the brand faces the world. And it's driven innovation. Kids tend not to stand still. It's hard to get them to wash hands for 30 seconds, which is what they needed to do. And there's not enough water in many places. So Unilever asked their design and R&D team to help solve this problem. And they made a Lifebuoy soap that kills the germs in 10 seconds, not 30, and changes color so that kids know when they're done. This is growth, value from values. This is core business growth and doing more good. This is a regenerative solution. And finally, an example of the kind of really full system partnership that we need. And this is really, in a lot of ways, the core story in the book is about palm oil, grown mainly in Indonesia and Malaysia. And there's been massive deforestation for years. The big buyers of this, consumer products companies, have tried to solve it for years and frankly failed. But recently, in the last 3-4 years, there's been a reduction in deforestation for the first time. And the reason is fundamentally that they got the whole system together. Not just big buyers like Unilever and Procter & Gamble, but local municipal leaders, the country, local farmers kind of in a jurisdiction. They got Greenpeace and NGOs at the table because they had knowledge on how to grow palm oil more efficiently, different species, different methods. And then they also got money, banks, so that they could finance the transition for farmers, so they could transition their fields and not have to cut down another acre. This is the kind of partnership that gets us where we need to go, to healthy forests and animals, healthy businesses, and a healthy environment for people. This is what regenerative work looks like. In the end, business cannot thrive unless people and planet thrive as well. So I ask you, how will you be net positive? The answer to that question will change the world. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias.